Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew, and thanks for coming to my Tiny Indie Founder Journey and Workshop talk. 13 years as a small indie game dev. Uh, Hopefully, you're here because maybe you're a little bit like me. You're someone who's just interested in games and you want to put together games for a commercial purpose, and you'd like to make more of them. And particularly interested in the workshop, which we'll do after this, which is related to uh, making games faster. So making more than just one game. Personally, I'll go over a short development story in the first hour on how I self-published over 100 games. Not just myself and a team, but it started off with just myself. And this talk will be a reflection of my experience prior to becoming an indie dev for 13 years. And I'll talk all about what I did in school, a bit about the uni I went to, then onto making mobile games, and then eventually having kids, then moving to Steam, console, and beyond. And then we'll wrap things up with a discussion around tools and access to education, and start a workshop on some tools and methodologies on how we could put together a new indie founded project and do it in a faster fashion. So thinking about a framework that will help us practice developing games quicker. So before indie, I started off playing a whole bunch of school sports. And this is particularly relevant, I think, to understand my background of before I started indie as to how I could kind of think about doing anything that's sort of team related or difficult and requires multiple streams of skills effectively apply there. And I'll bring up some more of those things as we go into the workshop. I then went to uni. I did an information systems and marketing co-op degree. There was an element of industry placement in there, which kind of helped shape things for me. I kind of knew at the time I definitely wanted to do something in computing, but gaming, I guess, was not this big a thing. So we're talking now 2000, I think was when I was around at uni. So just prior to that, so 1997 to 2000. So by picking, I guess, a degree that's both allowed me to have a look at sort of the computing side, not necessarily engineering, but the information systems under a commerce degree, and marketing. Although I didn't know it, I was setting myself up with some of the skills probably required to think about opening your own business and making indie games. And then after that degree, I worked in sort of large enterprises, Macquarie Bank and Telstra, and then also in some smaller roles. So in small businesses, startups even, and primarily worked in that as a developer and kind of moved myself up to the kind of as a project manager role. So that was quite a while going through that, probably about 13 years. So a fair bit of, I guess, of my early career life, I guess I was already in software development. And so you could probably see in the way that I give some of this talk, a lot of my ideas are sort of a software development mindset. And when you bring that into games, it has a particular, I guess, impact, good and bad. But I'm very curious, and if anybody's not necessarily from a programming background, if you're more like an artist or musician or a sound designer or a narrative person or just something animator, VFX, you name it, just anything outside of programming, just let me know in the chat, because I'd really like to make sure I can try to talk to the same audience, to the right audience. So given that, I'm coming from a fairly sort of software-driven background. I have a project manager role, so I've thought about how to start and end projects, software projects. That sort of shaped a lot of my early thinking around sort of agile development, Scrum, all the traditional things that you hear here today, and especially related to game dev. And I think a little bit more of risk taking, which is the next point, is particularly relevant. So I took a bit of time off from work for 2 years. I moved to Hong Kong, and I was just self-trading currency futures and indexes mainly. And I played a little poker. Not really gambling, but mostly trying to figure out, and try to understand odds and the chances of success. And I think partly why that's related to games, and I'm not talking about just gambling games, but just probably more related to indie development itself, is that I do see business, or at least the way that making indie games and indie projects are a little hit and miss. I mean, it's not necessarily an industry standard, or it's not a standardized industry. It's probably developed a hell of a lot, I guess, over the last 10 years. And it's becoming more mature, I guess, in that sense, or more established is probably the right word. But anything that's going on in the indie space, I would say, is a risk-taking endeavor, especially if you're looking to try to make something commercial. And so essentially that's what I did right after doing all of this 13 years. And the reason why I think I changed from being a sort of a career track minded person, so to speak, and I had this idea that, okay, I'm going to be in software, try to do the software ladder, so to speak. And then I kind of got a bit sick of it towards the end. I sort of needed a break, I think, and I didn't have that creative side of me, having grown up playing games, and I was playing plenty of Dota at the time, Counter-Strike, etc. I don't think I had enough of that creative input. Certainly, the types of projects that I was working on, typically regular customer-focused sort of apps, but not anything game-like or anything that even required a pretty user interface, like just basic text, some text fields, and some basic web forms. So a lot of the time, I felt kind of stifled in that sense. And I do recall going back to university, even before uni, back in high school. I think I messed around with art a little tiny bit. Not a hell of a lot. I couldn't draw. I still can't draw, actually. But I think I took up some painting. And that was just something that eventually built up where I said, you know what, I just need a break. And at the time, I guess, why would someone just jump out of a career like that, especially without being sort of like indie development being an established thing, or especially not in Australia, at least. I got the typical crazy look whenever I mentioned it to any of my colleagues or my boss. And I think this might be I don't know if this is relevant to any of you guys, but especially if you have this conversation with your parents. Mind you, I was sort of 13 years on out of university, but you may end up, especially if you're pursuing this kind of degree, you may ask, this course of life, I guess. You may question, is it a safe endeavor? Well, probably not is the right answer. But it's terribly creative. It's liberating in the sense that, the freedom to choose what you do, it allows you to become, I guess, an immediate boss of yourself. There's nobody else telling you what you should do with your time, what time to turn up to work, per se. And I think the main thing that really pushed me there was I just wanted to see if I could finish things. Because funnily enough, during all of those enterprise roles and the small businesses and startups, none of those projects ever really managed to complete. So I went from literally I think one of them did. It was a tiny iOS app. It was literally just take some photos and put some notes on it, and that was it. But I think once I'd sort of seen that, and that was near the end, I realized, okay, I've been in this environment for so long, and I've seen so many projects. I wouldn't describe them as necessarily fail because they had plenty of funding, but none of them actually getting to completion. It kind of really bothered me because I was like, you know what, I'd really like to finish something sometime. So, so I made the shift. I said, okay, when I start this thing, I'm gonna do things differently. Right. So fast forward. So this is now 2012. I'd quit my job. I'd saved up probably about 9 to 12 months, depending on how I negotiated things with my wife, of savings, and said, okay, the mortgage comes due around the 12-month mark. I've got this small window before, we'll just go back and start another job. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do with myself? How am I going to take, what I've got here, which is a software development mindset, but never having actually made anything game-like, but having a love and interest in games. I think I, at the time, had played some Flash games, although I wasn't really that into, wasn't that familiar with small games. But I think just out of luck, things started to improve, started to make sense. So the first project I chose, and you'll see the typical scope creep problem. So this will help just give you an idea. It was called Robo Arena. I'll just play a quick, where are we? We'll just play a quick, go to the right page. Where did I put it? Oh, okay. Yeah, here we go. Bring that up. Trailer for it. So this was like probably way too big a choice, as you can probably tell. It's multiplayer, it's asynchronous turn-based. It was for mobile, so hence the vertical alignment video there. But I just bit off too much, way more than I could possibly chew. But it was good learning. Essentially, this art I think we commissioned from a. This is my old studio name, and here we go. Just bring that back up. Yeah. So the typical kind of learning and the typical thing that you always hear, which is scope small, start really small, don't try to bite off too much before you can chew. And I think some of that discussion, we should get into more of that in the workshop as to whether that's a good idea or not. Because I think without having tried to do something that was probably a bit too ambitious, I never really would have known where my limits are. And I found them pretty fast, actually. So within, I think, 4 or 5 months, I was really stuck. I was like, okay, I've barely got I've got like a semi-prototype polish, maybe half a demo sort of describe things. And I don't think I can finish this thing. And I said, okay, I chewed up basically half of my 9 month, if we're calling it a short runway, 9 months of runway at 4 or 5 months. And I said, I chewed up half of it, but when I look at extended from what I've already done so far, I don't think I can really finish this thing. Luckily enough, I sort of searched around on the internet at the time, and I found a guy who had been making mobile games, but a much shorter, much tinier, simpler, sort of casual approach. So one-button games, or hyper-casual, I think is what they started to be called 5 years ago. Mind you, this was 13 years ago. And that became quite a fortuitous shift. First of all, I looked at his game size and I realized, wow, these games are actually finishable within probably about 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Like, not finishable, but you could get the very, very strong gist of what was going on. And then it was just levels and repeating sort of things after that. And what made it kind of, I guess, interesting to me at the time was, okay, is not only is it shorter, but I can start to see this idea of it, which is down in the bottom, like this this idea of, well, you can take concepts and make simplified versions of them, just like an icon, for example, in art, and still represent what the larger or the more complex thought is. And that got me into the idea of, okay, well, maybe I could make much shorter games, and maybe I should try to give this a go, which I did. And funnily enough, the very first game I put up right after that was called Megabee. I don't have a great example of it because I actually sold the app after this, but essentially just put your finger on the screen and move it around, object avoidance, don't run into anything, and chase a high score. That only took 2 weeks to put together. I put it up on the store for about $2. I think I had to make a separate version at the time between an iOS and an iPad version because I couldn't figure out how to dynamically adjust the screen size or the UI. Mind you, at the time I'm making both these projects in Cocos 2D, which I don't think exists anymore. I think it's now called Cocos Creator, which is an HTML5 framework. And at the time it wasn't, though. It was, I think, writing Swift, which is iOS's kind of language. And okay, so going back to that, I put up the app. It didn't sell all too well. A couple $100 rolled in, but the interesting thing was that I finished a game. I actually put it up and put it on the store in about two maybe 3 weeks. And then I got approached, funnily enough, by somebody who just found my email and said they were super interested in the game, but instead of just wanting to play it, they actually wanted to buy the game from me. And this was a new thing for me because I was like, oh, okay. So maybe it was a new thing really early back in the iOS stages because they had some sort of purpose for it. So we negotiated, I think, at the end of the day for $5,000, $6,000. I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. I think it might have even been US dollars. So it was actually a decent amount. And for that amount of work, I thought, oh, this is actually not bad. Maybe I should think about continuing this line of thinking small games. And I took that money and hired some artists on Fiverr. And that sort of became our indie studio at that point, because I was no longer just one person. I was now like myself plus a contracted artist, and I was thinking beyond just one game. I was thinking, well, how do you make games faster? How can I complete more games, and how can I survive? And I think that is a really important thought. That thought process of, well, how do I make more than just one game is part of the answer. It's probably not just part of it. It's the foundation of the answer that I'm going to give you, which is that I think just like sports or just like going to the gym, building games is like a repetition or practice of doing something. And the more times you can repeat, obviously, the better you get at it, the more muscle you build, so to speak. And so thinking far beyond just one perfect game or your ideal or the dream game, as a lot of people like to refer to it as, I think that is where the thinking goes in terms of, okay, well, how do I go beyond one game? First of all, there's monetary considerations, and some of the answers that I'll give from my previous history won't be the same as what they're probably, I guess, making money in games nowadays is like as a commercial reality. But we'll talk about that. But the more, I guess, enduring and important part of it is, well, how do you skill up? How do you put together something? Because this is something that I was approaching from a software mindset, but there were so many other aspects that I didn't understand anything about. So art, what is Photoshop? No idea. I was looking at pixel art. Is that something that I could potentially pick up? I think at the time I didn't start in 3D, I just focused on the 2D side of things. There's animation, there's sound design, there's music. There's a lot of aspects. There's narrative. Once you put all of those together, you realize that it's this giant skill pile where you're effectively, I don't know, it's almost like you're maybe playing an idle game where you're trying to pick up on all these different skills and slowly move the numbers higher and higher. And I don't really think you can do that over a single project, to be honest. I'd like to give you some tips potentially that will help you make a single project go faster, a bit like a game jam. But I'm sure a lot of you have already participated in game jams, and it's probably not the best, the best advice either necessarily, because what works for one project may not necessarily work for another. So I think the way that I see it develop out is, and I'll go through it as we get into the workshop, but I take a slightly different approach other than just make a lot of games, because it's a bit more nuanced than that. Okay, so just getting back to the story, my wife got involved because we started to make enough ad revenue. Actually, at the time, I started to put out a game every 2 weeks. That was quite an effort to do that, but an effort in both scope, but also trying to learn new skills and try to learn game design skills as to how to make a game more interesting. At the time, I just went from something simple as object avoidance, and I thought, well, okay, how do I make an endless runner, for example, or how do I make a platform game, or how to make a racing game, or how do I make a whatever game, shooter, and you name it. I effectively just did game jams for 2 weeks, and every game jam I'd put up on the iOS and Android stores. I didn't charge money for them. I made them free. Initially, I think the first game, Rob Arena, I did try to charge money, but all the other games, actually, at Rob Arena, I paused, and I never finished that beyond the sort of what you saw in the trailer. But all the other ones I did complete, got them to an end. And funnily enough, I think I started to figure out, okay, I think I understand a pattern here after about 3 or 4 games. So I would say, just even if you've worked on a couple of games and you don't feel like you're going fast enough, you're probably actually doing all the right things. But I'm happy to, also just chat if anybody wants to show me the games or where they feel like they might be sort of getting stuck or which elements, and we can talk about how to sort of speed that up. But honestly speaking, I think it wasn't really until the 5th or 6th game that I started to feel more comfortable with the format of, okay, I'm going to, start. Where do I start in a game? Well, I start at a title screen, and then where do you go from there? And then go all the way through the process and build up, a leaderboard or whatever it happens to be, if it's a score chaser. Probably until the 6th game. And then I just continued that and started to grow the scope over a 2-year period. And I think after you go through that process, you will naturally speed up. And what we'll go through in the workshop, and I'll give you some advice, is probably the sorts of things that you should think about as you're trying to plan out what do I work on each game? How can I improve across the board? And how do I think about or map out this path and strategize it somewhat so that I can do it faster rather than doing it slowly? Because that's the name of the talk. Okay, so early titles didn't look good. I do actually have a picture of Megabee here. This was me learning Photoshop, and I learned how to do an outline and put a shadow. And we put up the games, and I figured out how to do very basic filters to put some texture on these things. And that's the other thing, to be honest, and I do feel somewhat embarrassed to put this up, but it's something that I think all of us, and you probably are aware if you've even worked on a game jam, But this idea of imposter syndrome does rear its ugly head constantly. And even now, I'd find it hard to say that, I'm giving a talk about how to make games. That means I'm somewhat of a person who can talk about this sort of thing, like a teacher, maybe not a full teacher, but at least in passing my knowledge. And that feels funny to me, even 13 years on, to feel somewhat of an imposter. So I do apologize. I do actually feel a bit nervous giving this talk, but it's so be it. I do encourage you, as you put your games up, you'll start to develop a thicker skin. You'll start to realize you've just got to take yourself not too seriously. It does take time. You might even notice this little side character. I managed to squeeze in on that one. This particular game was fantastic. I'm not going to play it, but I do have a link to it in the notes. And a very nice, or actually very harsh crew named Chet and John put together a review of this particular one on YouTube. It's still there. There's a link to it. But they did describe it as and I'm not going to swear, but it was the effing worst game on the entire App Store, according to their review. Funnily enough, though, after they left this review, we actually got quite a few downloads because people wanted to see what the effing worst possible game on the iOS store looked like. Sorry, I'm just having a chuckle to myself, but I got no feedback, but I hope you guys find that funny. So I just developed very slowly, as you can see. Even over here, this is probably well beyond my 5th or 6th game. This is probably getting in on the 2nd year. I finally started figuring out how to put 3D models into Unity at that point. I think I started Unity probably about, after I'd started the idea of making mobile games a bit quicker, probably, 6 months at least. No, maybe closer to 9 months in. I was still on 2D, and then I started to make a bit of a shift over to Unity because I felt like, okay, part of what helps make projects, it's not just a different aesthetic, but I wanted to get a bit more involved at that stage, push my skills in terms of what I'm doing in terms of the art department, not just relying on somebody else to draw, especially if it was my own vision as well. This is not my modeling, by the way. Don't feel afraid to use asset packs. Asset packs I do encourage, definitely early on, because there's just so many aspects that you've got to get through as a developer, as a programmer, from a program-centric view, that I think get the fundamentals at least of the software down before you start moving over to art. I mean, obviously, if you're a trained artist, great. You're probably coming the other way around. You're probably thinking the other way. Probably bed down all the art before you have to work out how to do some complex code. But I'm going to give this talk from my perspective, so sorry, you'll just have to bear with me. So my perspective is, I was a programmer. I don't know much about art, so I'm just going to use a whole bunch of assets that I found. Bought from the asset store. And then, more notably, after a while of producing games, some of them just started taking off. They weren't all that bad. They started getting traction. I was around at the right time, I think, in the very early mobile stages where free-to-play games hadn't totally taken over the entire market, and they were willing to sell via ads. They were able to buy players. So effectively, games like mine, I could effectively run ads, and I could give up a player, but in return, they'd send me a little bit of money. And that's luckily kept us going. And I slowly sort of developed out a bit more of a sense of, okay, here are the different genres, because don't forget, I didn't do a game design degree. I wasn't even aware of genres per se. I knew what Counter-Strike was, and I knew what Dota was. I played some RTSs like Warcraft and whatnot, but I wasn't aware that the broad scope of sort of Steam tags that exist nowadays. I think the closest thing that I started to become aware of was there was such a thing as keywords that started to become, and then less so. They became really important during the time that I was doing things, and people were talking about SEO or ASO, app store optimization, and that was mostly a keyword ranking thing. So something that did really well was this particular game. It's called Scooter X, and that's because for the word scooter, it was literally one of two apps that that was available to play anything to do with the scooter. And there are plenty of kids, and not just kids, adults who like scooters. And you can see some of these. My wife sort of helped me design these, but even just this particular word, gymnastic, was a really big thing earlier on because there were no gymnastic games. So I think that's pretty much died down. That died down after a couple of years because games slowly filled up and keyword rankings became more and more difficult. But that luckily was keeping us going to the point where I was able to go and have kids. So I took a break. I won't describe all of that, but I can say after having kids, definitely my production speed and things like working on games, the amount of time that I had to play games and develop games was drastically reduced. So just keep that in mind. Okay. I'm just going to take a quick water break. All right. And so there's a little bit more to go, and then we'll start the actual workshop, which I think is hopefully going to be really fun. All right, so we made a Steam pivot. This is probably six-ish years ago. And it's when we started making more serious games. So as you can see back here, these are sort of all over the place, eclectic bunch of games where I feel like I'm just exploring genres and figuring out mechanics at this stage. But moving on to the more serious end, I guess, of Steam, I started with strategy games and I chose RPG cards as my first model. So Demon Tide started off as a collectible card game. That's our first game. Actually, yeah, that's what I was supposed to do. I intended to show you a quick idea of what that shift started to look like. Let me get out of that. Here we go. Demon Tide. Good. It's only 30 seconds long. I had this idea of, because I played plenty of Dungeons and Dragons, of adventuring along using kind of Hearthstone mechanics. But this is earlier, before Hearthstone kind of had those extra modes. Or as many of them. I think they might have had a few, but not just one or two. But yeah, effectively just tried to put together something that I felt was fun and small enough that I could finish this thing. So I kept, before I started this particular project, which was longer than all of the now we're moving away from casual mobile games 2 weeks apiece. We're now looking at somewhere between 3 to 6 months, depending on how you count it. Because technically I did try to start another card game before this, just to learn how to put a card game together from a data perspective, and we can definitely talk more about that in the workshop if that's of interest or not. But effectively, I started to figure out, okay, it's just me programming, but now at this point, we're going to put, I think we had 3 artists involved in this one. I still did the animation, the VFX, the sound, and the music. At this stage, we were buying royalty-free tracks. And we weren't actually engaging composers, but this is my first attempt at talking to some composers and figuring out how to make music that fits. Which was, we can also go through and workshop that if that's of interest. Or if you're really lucky, you've got an actual composer or an audio person on your team, and you can sort that out. Okay, so let's get back to this. following Demon Tide, which wasn't hugely commercially successful, but did open quite a few doors, I started getting cash strapped again. So I needed a quick follow-up, and that became Spellsword Cards Origins, which has an interesting story, because after we made it, so I'll describe the making of it. So the making of it, the concept was, let's just take, I started a roguelike mode in Demon Tide, and I felt like if we just take that concept out and make it a standalone game, and reduce the whole deck building thing down to just top decking, so you're effectively just picking the top card and choosing whether you're going to play it or you're going to throw it out. And then that was originally how I started prototyping it, but eventually it became a hand. But you could still just throw cards out of your hand, discard at will. And so, luckily enough, at the time, roguelike deck builders were not really a thing. I think Slay the Spire had just started. No, maybe actually. Oh, I can't remember. Actually, no, maybe it was around. Yeah, just being early, I guess, on some of these trends. I'm not suggesting you necessarily chase a trend, but these longer-lasting, I don't know what to call them, something longer than a trend. It might be a good idea, especially if you're scoping for a short development cycle. I was attempting to do this in 2 months. I actually had a really decent working prototype after about a month, mostly from stripping code and a lot of the art initially from Demon Tide, but I'll show you what Origins look like, which in the end looks nothing like Demon Tide. But here we go. Just oh, actually, we end up selling it. So Origins Spellsword, maybe under my account. Yeah, I think they still have the same trailer. I knew this is more like a PC adapted mobile game, so it's more kind of centered to the screen. So basically, pick a character, run through the dungeon, throw your cards, either play your card or throw it out. That's actually all you do. And then we added this idea of card fusion, which I sort of figured it out after I'd made a few cards that I could put the cards together, code programmatically. And that became Origins. And so luckily that did really well. On iOS, we got featured by Apple. PlayStation, Google Play returned reasonably well. I moved it over to Steam and it sold okay. Made enough back from Demon Tide. And then during its actual run, surprisingly, I actually ended up selling the thing twice. So once was to a platform who wanted to do something like Apple Arcade. They actually approached me directly and said, we'd like to buy your app. So I said yes, happily, because I need the money and I'm happy to keep making other games as long as, I don't have to give you, like I needed to keep the word Spellsword Cards and they were happy with that. The naming and the IP of it overall, but they could have this particular game. And surprisingly, or not unsurprisingly to some degree, I guess in hindsight, for them that wasn't their platform wasn't so great, or it didn't really last. And so after about half a year, I think they end up very nicely giving the game back and saying, we can't use this, but as per our agreement, you can have the game back and you don't have to refund us. They just closed up shop effectively, gave the app back. And so I'm sitting there with the app again, and lo and behold, like, I don't know how this happened, but I got approached again by somebody else who just wanted to buy the app outright. And so I sold it again. So I actually ended up selling it twice. And that funded us into the next game. So some of these stories might sound really just like, oh, Andrew's just teaching you how to just roll the dice and get a random chance, which I must admit, it feels like that. And a lot of, well, at least my experience in business has been like that. It's not a tried and true path, for me at least. I didn't know necessarily what I'm doing, and I still, to some degree, maybe don't. But it's interesting, and I have creative freedom, and I enjoy it. Embrace the chaos is probably the right phrase. So Dungeon Top was funded out of East. And Dungeon Top was kind of our first kind of major success on the Steam platform. Prior to that, I realized I'm not making the screen all that big. But prior to that, these games actually did okay. So Amazing Princess actually had 5 million downloads. Scooter X, I think, had over 1 million. Sweet Shop Tower was my first attempt at using ads to buy players and run an actual free-to-play game. As an indie, as a tiny team, like that's too much to ask. I can say at the end of the day, luckily, I think I put maybe $10,000 of ads in and we returned about 7,000 back out, and I would chalk that up as a win. As I learned a lot, but we didn't really go anywhere on that. Wasn't for me. I think if you're going to do a free-to-play game, there's a certain skill set, particularly around analytics, sort of data mining, data science, that is evident that I don't have, and I think that skill is pretty important. So going back over to the premium side, Dungeon Top. So just in case you're not familiar, Dungeon Top. Yep. Oops, that's a demo, but that shouldn't matter. It should be the whole thing. Yep. Again, a card game, but mixed with a tabletop game. And Maggie found a really, really awesome artist, and we can talk about how this particular artist did the entire concept in at one afternoon, like literally overnight. And the concept was so good, it pretty much stuck right through the game. And I still chalk that singular concept up as to the reason why this particular game did really well. Some people might have said, oh, it just looks like, Darkest Dungeon, which is kind of true, I guess, if you look at all the black lines. But that helps sell copies. So, yeah, and I think that in the end, this thing I think it's 40,000 copies sold overall. We ended up porting that through to. We haven't gone to mobile yet, although I've been approached several times. But we're on Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, on the consoles, and Steam. All right, moving on quickly so we can just get through the rest of this. We started to effectively stay in the same lane, and this is where I would advise that you guys don't necessarily do this all the time. It's really good to branch out, and it's helpful to be creative. There's pros and cons of branching out. Obviously, there's new things and things that you're not familiar with. But and I'll show you what happened over time. Effectively, the sales of these games over time started to drop off. So the project lengths remain roughly the same. I never really took more than 9 months to deliver any of these projects. But I think by staying in the same lane and not really looking at, I guess, the evolving player bases, sort of trends or behaviors was detrimental to our strategy in this sense. But I certainly had learned how to make these kind of games. So Defend the Rook was probably, I'll just quickly show that without having to show the whole thing, but just so we can see. Sorry, that's that. Yeah. It's kind of more like a tactics game. There's no cards, but you do have spells. Mixed with a tower defense. So you have waves of enemies that spawn in, and you have some sort of choices to make, some roguelike elements. And then the next game beyond that was Stillness and Rain, which are kind of like two games put together. First, the card game is just like a dungeon crawler, a bit similar to, you could see, Origins, so that was actually quite easy to make. And then I was really a big fan of Monster Train at the time, and so this sort of sideways auto battler, so to speak, a turn-based auto battler became a thing. So I ended up merging the two games together, so you could play as the good guys on one side, and you could play the bad guys and defending against the invading good guys. and that was a very quick project in the end. Actually, not that fast, about 6 months. That also, by that stage, we were slowly growing the team. So this team ended up being a game designer, 5 to 6 contract artists, a programmer apart from myself, and then sound people, 2 sound people. That was a really large team, and that you can kind of see from the sales, it probably didn't really cover back what we ended up putting in. It was roughly break even by the time you add everything up. And then slowly, I realized after a few projects, okay, this is not tenable. I can't continue doing this, although it's fun to do it, and I really enjoy putting these games together. I've got to make the next game. And the only way to make the next game is we start to have some commercial viability, some commercial success. So I started to downsize the team. We also picked up some contract work, which is necessary, and we can talk about that after the workshop if any of that's interesting to you. And we started playing for grants in the most recent rounds. But again, I haven't been successful. I know some people who have are playing for grants. But one thing I can talk about is during this time, we got some minimum guarantees to finish Dungeon Top and some Defend the Rook from our lovely partners, publishers. Yeah, learning about pitching skills and how to put together a decent sort of demo or a prototype or vertical slice is pretty important. Okay. Right. Just moving on to the last section. So now we're talking about the last 2 years. Castellon is a project I started at the beginning of the year. Actually, just before the year, Christmas. It's a hybrid of an RTS and a tower defense, but really small. Like the game lasts about 30 minutes per level, so to speak. And putting this together was a much smaller team. So effectively myself and one other 2D artist. She's doing the UI. And I'm doing everything else. So I'd learnt Blender. We can talk about some tricks that I'd learnt to figure out how to put textures in the game, which saves a lot of time. Moving on from that one, we're also working on odd jobs. So I'll just quickly get that. That one, luckily, we did pick up a publisher. And this one's Luffy. This is what I learned on, effectively, putting together a kind of a somewhat narrative, relaxing adventure. Learn how to animate, rig characters, create VFX in Unreal. This is when I switched over from Unity to Unreal. Still working with the same 2D artist to put together things like this book. And one last thing. Where's our last upcoming releases? And you may have seen Odd Jobs at Playmakers. So I started this in May. Yeah, put this thing together in May. It's a trolley returning couch co-op game. I'm still figuring out a lot of the gameplay, but I think the premise is there. It's basically just running around a car park, putting a lot of things away, and just doing silly stuff. So the more silly stuff I can find, the better. Again, not really much textures. Our 2D artist has started to learn some 3D, so she's helping with retopology. And for anything like the characters, she's helping texture those. So there is a bit more texturing going on than the other games. Okay, and that leads us to today. Right, that was Unreal. And I think, okay, so keeping yourself alive or keeping ourselves alive has meant we've had to not just work on our IP and not just rely on grants from not grants funding from publishers, because we haven't yet successfully gained upfront funding, and our sales of existing titles, although like the long tail's good, it hasn't been able to keep a whole team alive, so we've had to downsize. Yeah, you've got to start to look for other forms of income, and that maybe even part of what this talk is about is trying to just get yourself a bit out there so that you can potentially pick up contracts, in the local scene, or find other people who may need help with their projects, and should keep a kind of tabs on the industry. I did consider, actually, because some people asked me, well, what if you have to go back and get a regular job? And I thought, well, I actually haven't had a CV for about 12 years, and I don't think I'm all that employable in that sense. But I'm sure I can find a way to make one and make something work if necessary. But that's, that's outside of the topic of this this talk. But we can go through more of that after the workshop if you like. And we could have a quick talk about tooling. I think I don't know, I'm getting up close to an hour. We're on an hour now. Might actually skip over this stuff, and we'll put this off if we want to talk about it right after the workshop. No problems. We'll just do it. But what I can say is, yeah, access to education, that's probably something that's still quite relevant and important to figure out. So you guys have been through uni. You've probably done a bunch of design courses and coding courses and art courses, and that's fantastic. That wasn't available to me at the time. Even YouTube wasn't really available, but now probably the problem that you're having is what to listen to, because there's too much noise. I had the opposite problem, didn't have enough. But at the time, pretty much manuals and documents. Reading the manual was the way to do things, unfortunately. But yeah, you don't have to do that anymore. And there are plenty of people that you can ask and get support on to get skills. But happy to talk about a little bit more about that if necessary. Okay, this is a quick role model. If you want to look through what a small indie role model to me looks like, you can grab the slides and have a look at these guys. Gavin, Jonas, and Dorian are current and fantastic, very successful developers. Okay, let's get into the workshop. This is faster to the finish. Let's just take a quick poll. Who's still here? Oh, there are more people here. For some reason, I thought I'd lost all of you. Is there a way, just asking the mods, Sam, is there a way that everybody could either type or talk, or can we open it up so that everybody can not necessarily talk over the top of each other, but we could take turns, and so I could ask questions and get feedback to drive the workshop? Or should I do it through text?
I can invite people up to the stage to talk.
Say again?
I can invite people up to the stage to talk if that works.
Yeah. Does that mean I have to get kicked off, or I can just stay here?
You can stay here. We'll just have to do it one by one or by groups.
Alrighty. All right. Okay. I'll give you a quick round of some theory, I guess, about how I approach making this process of putting together games faster. And then we'll get into an actual worked example. Okay. So bear in mind, as you know, my background is programming. This is going to be probably more useful if you're making a systematic type of game. Now, I have heard a talk from a really fantastic talk, actually, from Jojo Zhou of Massive Monster, Cult of the Lamb fame. And she was giving a talk on how, even though Cult of the Lamb is, seems to have a fair bit of narrative, it's still a systematic game, but it can be narratively led. It can have narrative elements versus a narratively led game, which is probably not as effective for this technique that I'll show you. And that's just because I don't come from a writing background, so I can't really talk on the best way to put together those type of games. But systematic games, there are a lot of genres that this can fall into, that this can be applicable to, so hopefully it'll be useful. The tried and true mantra of failing fast failing often. I put repeat often here because it's probably a nicer way of putting it. But honestly, failing fast and failing often is at the crux of it. And but I'll show you, I guess, not just do it faster and just fail faster, but what to think about, I guess, after you fail will be useful. The primary methodology is doing this. And I don't really know what it's exactly called, but I've got the reference here. It's in my notes. You can look it up if you really need it. It's by Henrik Nieberg in 2016 in a paper he wrote, Making Sense of MVP, Minimum Viable Product. Testable, usable, lovable. But it's this concept of, okay, if you're going to build a car, for example, don't just build one wheel and then two wheels and then put the body of it on. And then finally, at the very end, you'll have a car that someone can actually use. Because someone can't use a single wheel. So from step 1 all the way through to step 4, none of it's usable. And my methodology, like I'd like to push through with this, is to build a skateboard first. So make sure that it's usable from day 1. Even though it's not a car, it's a very simple proxy. And I like that word, proxy. And I think you can use it more than just in code, but I think in all the different streams required for making games, as well as when we talk about putting the glue together and sticking the whole game together, we can use this analogy, and let's workshop it. The other part of it is a sports analogy. So this is a marathon, not a sprint. Habits get involved. So your daily cycle, I know a lot of you are studying. How you study, you will probably already be aware of what you're kind of good at studying, what times you're good at studying, how did you figure out how to study better. And in the same way, making games, you're going to have to go through the same sort of learning cycle, but in topics that you may or may not be actually nearly as good at. So rather than picking a major that you might be familiar with or something that you kind of naturally have aptitude towards, well, at least in my case, some of this, including art, I was like learning something that was quite foreign. So think of it like a marathon, not a sprint, and develop good habits and break it down. So with sports, you often don't, for example, a basketball game, you don't just run out on the court, start playing basketball in a team and score a whole bunch of points and win a game. Usually you try to do that and you fail. You don't score enough points, the other team beats the crap out of you. And then you realize, well, you don't actually understand any of the fundamentals, like dribbling the ball. So you can often go off and practice dribbling a ball by yourself. And the same way, I think game making is similar. And you can do that with each of the streams. So if you need to work on sounds, if you need to work on your composition art direction, or making a particular model in a pipeline, or thinking about data-oriented design, or functional design in coding, all of these different approaches and the different sections can be practiced in isolation. And I think when you're doing that practice, you're actually doing more of this 1 to 4, which is fine because you're not trying to put a whole game together. You're actually just learning how each part works so that it becomes a tool in your toolkit. And eventually the coach says to you, well, okay, now you've learned how to bounce the ball. Now you've learned how to pass the ball. All right, here's the basic rules of a game. You have time and you've got to score points. Now give it a go. Put you on the basketball court and see how you go with your teammates. And obviously your first game's not going to be that successful. I'm talking about a basketball game here. And probably your 5th game, you may not be more successful. So why do we think that making games by your 5th game, you should be somehow really be successful is somewhat beyond me, because at least in the way that I've been learning throughout my life and how I learnt sports, I don't think it's that easy to just be naturally good at stuff. Some people are, but it wasn't me. Alrighty. Here's another approach too. Small size scope to large makes a lot more sense to me. Especially for this workshop, I'd rather let's workshop something down here in a $1 or $4 or $5 game. there's probably some merit to jumping into, and I do know some colleagues and friends who've gone through this process of creating much larger games. But I did it the other way around. And I still advocate for doing it this way. And I'll kind of explain why I think it makes more sense. And especially if you're trying to go faster, is that smaller games are faster to finish anyway. You still have to go through all the steps. You have to do a lot of proxying. And you may not get to a full polish of a car. You may end up somewhere in between. But you still do each section and create a proxy for each section. And you do finish faster to create, say, a $1 game versus, like a $15 game, all of which we've done. We've never done a $20 to $25 game. I'd really like to do one eventually. I don't really think I've got the funding or the patience at the moment or the skill set. But this will become more evident, I think, as we go through the workshop as to why small to large, I think, is the right approach. Gives you more chance to practice and perfect some of the things that you'll probably need by the time you have a big game. Okay. There is one talk. I'll just make a note of it here, but you can find it in the notes. Rene Haberman has a really good talk on don't ship the wrong game, where he talks about before you even decide what game project you're going to start on, it's really important to probably do a bunch of prototypes or game jams in his particular talk. Definitely worth watching. I think he just got put on YouTube about a month ago, but it was from a conference earlier in France. All right, let's get into it. Prerequisites. I'm assuming that you're a bit like me when you came into this. That's some of the assumptions I'll bring up for the workshop. But if you're really quite different, please let me know, because I'll try to adjust for that. But assuming if you are like me, the relevant program skills I imagine you would have, and the way that you'd come into deciding to make a game faster and start this process, is that you've probably already worked with the building blocks of game engines. You've done maybe a game jam before. You can put together a bit of code so that you can figure out how do I make one mechanic connect to the UI or connect to the other parts. And if something needs to change, like data, which is the most important part, you're able to change the code. If you're probably coming in at a level where you don't yet know how to put together some of the mechanics, probably this workshop is not going to be nearly as useful. But bear with me, and I'll see what we could do. And the reason for this, and this is why I would suggest practicing this particular skill more like this, 1 to 4, is that this takes a bit of practice, actually. And I know there's a whole bunch of literature out there, and people just despising, oh, don't do bad code. These bad code smells are really important. Don't do it like this. And I would like you to continue to challenge things just as I do, and say, well, that's great. Now I'd like to hear why you think that, and then think about for yourself, or in which situations would that be most applicable, and what's the context that advice has been given, and what context is it not maybe that useful for. So I might suggest before you go into putting a whole game together, definitely know how to change code, because data wrangling and getting good at it and code refactoring itself is kind of the glue, how I describe it, to being able to do this process of going from a skateboard to a car. Yes, you most of the time don't want to do a lot of refactoring, and that's why you end up building in this fashion 1 to 4, but I've seen too many people get stuck in this fashion, so here we go. Another reason why I really advocate for this, and not just letting a player play it at day 1, but think about how a person plays a game anyway. Once you get feedback for a game, which is incredibly important, because the only way you're going to improve at the end of the day is to start getting feedback. Even if you do your own games and you produce 10 of them and you're actually quite decent at making your own games, to bring them to commercial viability, you're going to have to sell them. And then in order to sell them, someone has to like what you're making, and in order for someone to like it, you're going to have to get feedback. So that's the reverse logic thinking from that. So starting with feedback in mind, This is why I think it's really important to be able to make something really basic from day one so that you can get feedback on it, rather than wait to the very end and get feedback on it. And if you think about a person who plays a game, they can only play it forwards in time, like linear progression, serial progression in time. So they boot up the game, and what do they see on the first screen? What do they see for the first 30 seconds? What do they do for the first minute? What do they do for the first 5 minutes of your game? And then what do they do after that? So the first 10 minutes of your game. And then after that, you can start to branch out and worry about what's going on there. And here's again my unconventional wisdom flying in the face of conventional wisdom, which is I do believe somewhat of building tutorials first, or at least making the UI and UX readily understandable for the type of audience, and that your type of audience may be just other game devs initially. So we're not talking about a really high bar, but some sort of bar that's beyond, I don't know, just ASCII screen representation, which might end up being just too hard for some people to get their head around. Plus, be mindful of the other person's time. They're putting some effort to try to give you feedback. So giving them a bit of a head start or just an easier hand through UI and UX problems will greatly enhance the feedback that you get. And you won't be just getting UI and UX problem feedback, which typically happens to me over a long time. That I noticed whenever I didn't do this process and I tried to skip to, here's one piece of this really awesome procedural generation that I made that was so interesting because of X, Y, and Z. It was very hard for someone to give feedback on that because it was one thing in total isolation and there was no context and there's no UI or UX to frame it as a game. It was basically just an interesting code snippet. Okay. Artistic skills that I think, again, that I've now acquired as an individual, and I think almost everybody needs to probably have some of these skills. Even if you are in a team where you've got relevant, successful people who are going to take these roles on, there's still glue that happens in between. And the glue between people requires some of these basic skills. So a reasonable understanding of graphic design principles like layout, font, typography, of just what kind of looks bad when you put it next to something because it doesn't have enough room, or you can't understand it because relationally it's in the wrong place. And some basic color theory helps, goes a long way. Even without basic color theory, like the simplest rule might be just make less colors in your game and it's actually easier to understand rather than having 100 different colors, because that as a UI UX experience is very difficult for someone who's new to the game, who's trying to give you some feedback. If there's 100 colors on the screen, they don't really know what it is, that they're supposed to be looking at. So a bit of information hierarchy goes a long way. And we talked about this already, but if you need bottom-up learning skills courses, there's tons of them. I can recommend some other Udemy ones if you need to go beyond your coursework. And it's a really good thing to do before you try to put a whole game together, to be honest. Or just do some game jams, that's okay. You can definitely see where you fail and then figure out what you might have needed anyway in retrospect. Okay. I'm going to take things top down. So big picture, then middle things, then little things. And why we're doing it that way is the same reason as the skateboard, 1 through 5. We're going to try to take the big picture, find proxies for it, and then drill down into the details. And here's a really important quote. Art is never finished, it's only abandoned. That's why this approach, I think, will help us finish faster, in that you may not actually end up at the car, and many of my projects have probably ended up somewhere between a 3 and a 4. They never fully get to the final envisaged view because either you run out of patience, time, money, motivation. There's a whole bunch of different issues. Life gets in the way. But that shouldn't stop you from shipping necessarily, unless you've got contractual obligations. Okay. Let's get started. And I'll ask, this is the last example. This is Rene's example of map gen. He could have just spent a month figuring out how to make the perfect thing, but instead he spent a couple of days, a few hours of work, in fact, just building 3 static levels and adding some very basic randomization, like flipping the level left and right before he put Doberkeeper together. Eventually, he replaced that with this, and it looks much better, and the game's a fantastic game. Essentially, that in a nutshell is what we'll do through this workshop, but I'll try to help break it down into smaller pieces. Okay, let's start. All right, let's do a worked example. I'd like to just propose that we're starting a new indie studio and we're starting a new game. Let's decide on some parameters. It should be somewhere between a $1 and a $5 game for the purpose of it being able to finish this in a very short period of time. We're not going to actually build the game. We're just going to ideate and talk about it, and I'll show you the process of thinking of how to put this together so that you can then go and practice doing it this way, and hopefully you'll improve in terms of speed. Because just with a bit of a game plan, we'll get there. So that I can see everybody else. If anybody wants to type or anybody wants to talk, just say, hey, let me talk, or just type. Someone wants to do Tash wants to do a $5 game, great. Studying in the middle of the night is good, yep. Agile versus waterfall for sure. Okay, so 5 is the maximum I'm setting on this one, so we're going to do a $5 game. What sort of genre? Just anything, like first come, first serve, to be honest. If you hate it, you can say no. I've got puzzle game. Does anybody not like puzzle? Puzzle roguelike puzzle horror game. That will be interesting. Okay, yes, we could think of it. I'm sure we could do that. I'm just going to take off my jumper and getting hot. Grab a drink of water. Okay. Anybody? FNAF, yeah, roguelike. All right. With some comedy thrown in. Okay. All right. Just be aware, scope issues again. Big to small. Let's try to stay small to start with. Small. We'll get into small details. We'll work on the big details, but we'll get to the small things. But scope again. Important. Try not to throw too many things in there. So I'm glad nobody just threw in heaps of other genres like base building or shooter or what you name it. Maybe we'll just leave comedy out for the time being, just purely just to keep it simpler. But definitely once you get good at this stuff, you could put like 10 million things in it and you'd shrug it off. It wouldn't be a problem. So let's just go puzzle, roguelike, horror. Okay. Open world, yeah, for sure. Yeah, just Elden Ring it. Yeah. Oh, I didn't mention my failed prototypes. Yeah, we spent 6 months building, not an Elden Ring, but like a Souls-like, and then I canned it because I realized I don't have the skills or the budget or the size of team skills required to put together one of those games. So, if anyone's interested, and you come to Playmakers Arcade. I could pull it out. It's on the laptop somewhere. Okay, let's do puzzle roguelike. Horror. Okay. All right, so we have a scheme. Let's assume everybody has their own skills. How big is the team? Let's try to keep it to a really bare minimum team. I'd actually ideally like to assume that we're all just thinking about doing it ourselves, but let's say we can do the typical one artist, one developer. Is anybody, and maybe one sound designer if you really want a sound person? Or has anybody got any particular thoughts? You definitely want a bigger team? You don't want a small team? Because I can say the bigger your team, this is a really funny thing. Half a person, exactly. Here's one of my thoughts. Yeah, small team, no money. That's me. That's typical. Yes, wearing many hats. So typically, the bigger the team, this is in my experience, the more and more time you actually spend on communication and the less time you spend, even individually, on actual production. So, and I've noticed this all the way down to one person. So when I'm just by myself, I can still have conversations with myself in my own head and go crazy. But it's a lot faster because you can make executive decisions at lightning speed because you're the only person you need to check. So again, if we want to make a $1 to $5 game, also just bear in mind, if you have 5 or 10 people on your team, at a $5 game, you need to sell a lot more copies so that you can make your next game than if you have a smaller team. And I'm not advocating for people going around kicking people off their team necessarily, but this is just something to think about. Because you're not just thinking about one game. And I'd like to stress that to you, because I'm sure there's plenty of talks out there about how to create one game faster, but I'd like to make this an ongoing process. This is about how do we make games, plural, faster. Yeah, 2 to 3, cool. All right, so typically, you're typically going to fall into one of the two roles. Either you're the art side or you're the code side, you're the engineering side. But many people wear different hats, and I'm assuming that you've got a bunch of different skills, including people who are sound, animation, VFX people. But yeah, let's assume we're a smallish team. Exactly, your cat. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Okay. So we've got our price point. What's our platform? Steam is the usual default, but actually, to be honest, itch.io is a really good place to start, especially if you really worry about your reputation, which everybody does. For some reason, when you have no reputation, is the time when you worry about your reputation the most. And well, at least in my experience, and I don't know why that is, but it has something to do with imposter syndrome. So itch or Google Play, great places to start. You know why? Because you're kind of buried, you're sort of minute there, and people don't think of them as real gaming platforms sometimes. And then that gives you an excuse to think, okay, well, I could do this and not have to worry. I'm not going to assume that it's free though. We're going to charge some money. So, and if we're on itch, $5 is actually quite high. So maybe we might want to make it like a $3 game. Or do we really want to do a Steam game because everybody wants to know specifically, or Google Play? What do you think? Yeah. All right. Steam. All right. Steam, because Steam's the most. I'd actually love to do a Roblox game. I haven't yet sold a Roblox game. I haven't yet created one, actually, or published one. Sorry. Yeah, go bankrupt on the first day. Roblox might be really fun, but the problem is I don't have all that much experience. But some of you guys do. I intended to go to the Roblox workshop, actually. I can make some assumptions, but to be honest, I really don't have enough. I haven't done enough. Yeah, exactly. Shout out. I haven't done enough research on Roblox, so I don't know what the economics are like. Itch would be probably better. Okay, let's just do Itch or Steam. Itch or Steam. Steam? Or Google Play. Someone said Steam. Okay, I've got 3 votes for Steam. Let's just do Steam. That's the easiest one, because right now there's 3. Okay. Alrighty. So let's think about the timeline and include marketing. Okay. Is this like a game jam? How long are we going to work on this project for? Not during this workshop, obviously, but let's assume this is what's the size, and we're talking about small, repeatable. Silksong too, exactly. Yeah, who's not pumped for that? No, don't put up your hand. Just it's fine. I'm sure that's what everybody's going to be doing this weekend. Anyway, move on. How long are we going? 6 to 9 months. Probably a bit big for 2 to 3-person team. If we want to get some reps in, I'm sort of assuming that you're somewhere in the below the 5 games made threshold. So let's do somewhere 3 months. I like. All of these are quite large. All right, 3 months. 3 months full time. Yes, assuming full time, because we're talking being a founder here and trying to survive. Let's go the hard mode. I mean, there's obviously part-time modes that take longer, but yep. Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to aim for 3 months. We're going to put that as our hard deadline. Reality happens, interruptions, etc., and sometimes things go beyond. But let's just start there, so we all know what we're talking about. Okay. There's going to be interruptions, And then one thing that everybody always forgets about is the marketing side of things, or your promotion at least. Because we're not just making the game, we're trying to make more games in future, right? So how do at least we've got to think about, well, how do we present this game? How do we bring it to market? And what does that mean? Who's got the marketing skill on the team? Very important question, even though it's not a production. To be honest, I don't like this idea of pre-production production in indie gaming, indie development, because to be honest, you're all of the above. You're actually doing all of the things all at once, everything, everywhere, all at once. There's a decent movie, should watch it. Yes, TikTok marketing, yep, different platforms for marketing. Definitely go out there and learn each one. I encourage you to create a burner account. You didn't hear me say that, but yes, create burner accounts and just spam the crap out of them and just see what works and what doesn't work. I've been putting that off for far too long, but in the last 2 years, I've been experimenting with social media. I started creating videos of myself talking. That's how I'm able to talk to you today without just collapsing a heap of nervousness. It all helps. Yes, they are not production game dev skills, but getting out there and getting seen, not just yourself, your face or whatever, but your game is pretty important. Yeah, word of mouth. And so think about, well, from a perspective of marketing, how do I create screenshots? What sells a game? Well, apart from your friend telling you, what's the very first person, assuming no one's seen the game, and let's say you're not doing it in person, but you're going to put it up on itch or you're putting it on Steam, and we're going to put it on Steam. What do people tend to see first? Let's assume they got a link and they clicked on it. So they didn't just randomly type your name in, or maybe they saw it in a Steam algorithm, like a list of sort. But let's say you're not that successful yet, and you're still in wish list phase, so you're not on any lists. Someone's going to see a link somewhere and click it. They might see your title. So we've got to think about titles. But even before the title, most likely someone has seen a screenshot or a GIF or some sort of image. And so when you think about that image, what's going to be on that image? And I'd like to start the workshop there. See, when I think about a game, that's actually most of the time where I start. I don't think, what am I, I might think some general things like genre and what are some cool mechanics that I'd like to see. But when I actually sit down to pre-production and I do this planning, system requirements. All right. Getting back to the topic. So screenshots first. It's the actual first and foremost thing that someone sees. And let's say we're trying to build this game in a relatively quick fashion. And let's say we want feedback on this game in a quick fashion. How can you get feedback if you haven't written a line of code yet? Well, because code typically is a bit slower. Not for everyone, but let's say in the typical case. Well, one of the fastest things you can create first is concept art, right? Or even earlier than that, think skateboard and think the car, right? If the concept art is the car, what's earlier? What's the skateboard version of a piece of concept art? It might be a doodle. It might be some found clip art on the internet, some photo bashing. Yeah, exactly. So mood boards. Yep. So great references. So you grab all your mood boards and your rough sketches, right? And my goal, to be honest, in the very first deliverable, and we're talking about, what are we now, 5-10 minutes in this workshop, my goal is to actually create as much of that first screenshot, that gameplay screenshot, as possible. So it's going to be a puzzle, roguelike horror game. So just put your artistic hats on here, a picture of the character, like either your capsule art or your screenshot, anything there could do. That's how I'd think about it. So let's find the first proxy that still works, that represents a puzzle, has some puzzle elements. Let's say we haven't really broken down what kind of puzzle elements we're going to do here, and we can plan that out. But let's say we just picked, I don't know, something just off the bat, like I don't know, match 3. I can't think of anything else. But let's say it had match 3. You'd want something with a match 3 element to be showing up on that screenshot with a character. And let's say that character is Five Nights at Freddy's. It's some sort of teddy bear, right? Looking kind of evil or whatever, like some sort of mascot or whatever it happens to be, right? Get that screenshot up. Evil bear, exactly. Do we have any artists who can quickly draw one and just post it? Like, that'd be awesome. As I'm talking, if you're one of those multitasking people, you can doodle. Great. So that was a really good example, and we're just still thinking about the big things here. We're just ideating, and I'm already thinking, well, what's the very, very first thing that we can do? What's this thing? What's version 1 of each of these really basic ideas? Sorry, I just lost my notes for some reason. Here we go. Okay, and what kind of budget do we have? I'm assuming it's just sweat equity, right? Like that's the normal case. Or does anybody want to have $1 million trust fund? Yeah, I didn't think so. All right, let's just do it. It's sweat equity. The budget is we're going to put in our time, and we're eating ramen noodles until this game releases, and then maybe we'll think about getting some food to eat. All right. Okay, let's do the elevator pitch. And why, again, do we work on something that's, say, budget related, marketing related? Well, again, we're trying to do the big things first. And we're trying to find proxies of the big thing. So the first bit of feedback is a screenshot, and then you open your mouth and you say, the person says, hey, what kind of game? What do you do? What have you been doing, Andrew? Oh, I've been thinking about this game. Show the screenshot, and then the elevator pitch is usually the first thing that you say, right? So let's think of some examples. Anybody want to type an elevator pitch for a horror? We didn't say what perspective it is. A horror puzzle roguelike. It might go something like, it's a horror puzzle roguelike with horror puzzle roguelike with, or a horror puzzle game with roguelike elements where you avoid evil bears. Ideas. By, so we need verbs in here. Avoid evil bears by matching 3 somethings together. Escape random. Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Steve. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Bradley. All right, so brilliant. Horror puzzle roguelike where you must escape randomly generated rooms before evil bear gets you. Oh, yes. That's a good example of the proxy, maybe without the text, because he looks like Angry Bear. Not quite evil yet, but close enough. Very good. Connect 4 with Freddy. I love it. You guys are already thinking of it. So the problem that everybody typically has is ideation. It's not too many. It's not having enough. It's usually for some people, it's having too many ideas. For some other people, sometimes you go through ruts where you don't have enough ideas. And so that's why, I mean, like ideation and the big things are pretty important to start with. But if you're really stuck on the big things, I suggest don't move on to the smaller things. Go and get some inspiration first. Watch a movie, do something creative, go for a walk in the park. Generally speaking, it's not a great idea to dive into details, and exactly for the reason why we're doing this thing. Moving back to this until we've got a really good coverage of everything at a big stage, and then we'll start to go into the details and we'll start to improve from step 1 to step 2. Okay. Dumb idea possible. Go a step further, then exactly. So your ideas can breed more ideas. That's another great way of doing it. You start off with bad ideas. It's the same thing with everybody else. You have the imposter syndrome. If you just say, you know what, the first game that I make that goes out in the world is going to suck, and I'm just going to embrace it, so that the next one that spawns is going to be better. Thanks, Emerson. I totally agree. Yeah. By the way, I loved your talk back at Galaxy. That was fantastic. I enjoyed that. Okay, so yeah, let's get back to the next part. We've done the big things, and we've done our elevator pitch. Okay, so now once you've got a pretty decent idea of the scope, you're doing a GDD or not, because some people like it, some people don't. I don't want to weigh in as to whether it's better or worse. I've run teams with GDDs. I've also run teams just using Milanote and flow diagrams. And I've also run really small teams just with Trello, like literally just off the back of... I don't actually have a prescribed way to formalize your thoughts other than write them down. Definitely writing them down helps, because if you're just trying to remember them, either you're going to forget or your idea is going to shift anyway. Never. Exactly. Yeah. So some form of idea trapping, Miro. There's a whole bunch of them out there. I can suggest some more if my brain started working later on in this talk. Yeah, let's move on. Once we've written it down, now we're going to try to dive into our $5 Steam game horror puzzle roguelike that has a really cute, an evil bear as its mascot. All right, screens. Okay, so I tend to think that the next layer is more thinking in the lines of, okay, how do people play a game? The very first things let's assume it's a digital game. So we're not talking about physical, digital, or hybrid games or VR. Let's put VR aside, but let's talk about just a regular screen game. The very first screen is what they see. And then they experience usually a menu system, and then eventually they get into the world if it's a 3D game. Or otherwise they effectively stay in a menu system in a 2D game, or they go into the level, so to speak. This being a puzzle game, we may have some boards. So I assume we're going to need a couple of things. So our screens are typically going to be, I would go and write them out, and I'd put them in, say, a Milanote or some sort of flowchart board, but you'd start effectively with main menu goes to some sort of level select. Let's say we're just doing a very standard pass each level sort of thing, or yep, I love the bear. Right, and then you're actually going to get into the level itself, level or the game itself, and the level or the game itself may have some sort of pop-up menus. It's going to have a HUD, right? And then you're eventually going to have a game over screen at some point, like if you die, or you'll have some upgrades if it's a roguelike, right? So you'll have some upgrade screens. You may have some, inventory management, yada, 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 yada. You'll build out your screen list, and this is the point where we'll start to delve into just making it work first. So literally writing it down like this. This is version 1 of that, the skateboard idea, and then we'll start to polish this up. So just get everything you can think about down on paper. And if you think of really small things at this point, you can write them down, but I might suggest at least don't put them on the same layer or in the same document as your high-level document, as your level 1 document. And the reason for that is because we're trying to do this process of going small to big, and if you start to muddy it up, big to small ideas, but proxy, skateboard to car, so small skateboard first. If we muddy up the levels, it gets harder to do this process, in my mind, or at least the way I think. And the reason for that is I think in systems. And being a programmer, I can't help that. It's fairly systematic in that sense. All right. we then go through the mechanics, and you might say, okay, well, what are the actual inputs? And again, skateboard, right? At first, you might be like, I need drag and drop, or I need, I need touchscreen mechanics, or I need to be able to move things around, like the blocks or whatever the puzzle is. But I might encourage you again, think back to skateboard, right? What's the very first proxy for an input mechanic, right? And it might be like, instead of, it might be as simple as, okay, I want to be chased by a bear, and that's going to be the main threat, and that's the whole loop. So I'm going to proxy a puzzle with a button. Yeah, a single button. It's interactive. Maybe it has a label on it. What would the label have? It would be something like solve puzzle. Right? And then you might have another button, which is fail puzzle, right? And then the bear. All right, like you put the bear in a 3D environment or a 2D environment on the screen, and maybe the first thing that you might have is like a character controller, if it's a character control game or whatever. It's something really basic. Yeah. And this is what I mean by thinking in terms of really small proxies. It's not super evident because nobody could say, oh, a single button is a puzzle game. It's kind of saying, kind of like some people say incremental or idle games are not really games because they just play themselves to a certain extent. I would say, don't worry about that kind of thinking, embrace it, at least for the purposes of this workshop, so you can get the ideas. Because I think if you take that thinking and you super simplify everything down to one thing, then we start adding details, you'll start to notice things move a lot faster. And that's because we're hierarchically sorting this information. All right. Okay. All right. So there's a whole bunch of other things that you might be thinking about. What's the actual motion? Is it physics driven? Is this, are there animations? Or are we just moving things via transform? Again, the proxy, and this is something more programmatic. I'm sorry for people who may not be familiar with in-engine, but again, speed things up. Work just with transforms. Don't even add animations at that point. If you do need to move something, just move it via the transform or animate it. Keep things ultra simple. Like the simplest, I can't think of something simpler and still moving than honestly a game object that just moves via transform. And that could be the button itself. Or maybe if we're getting to the next level, we'll talk about moving other things around. ECS, online versus offline. These are all very large questions, and that's why I bring them up now, because if you wait too long to get them down to the tiny details, they probably have too much of an impact. Again, these probably are not necessary in this particular workshop because, who needs ECS for a puzzle horror game? And I'm assuming it's going to be offline just to keep scope small enough because, and Emerson might be able to talk to this, but at least multiplayer, in my experience, whenever I've added it, always doubles the amount of time. So if we've got 3 months to work on this thing and we want XYZ features, then again, if we're going multiplayer, that's got to be considered in the time frame. And 3 months is not an awful lot of time. If we're cutting that down to half a month, say 1.5 months, then yeah, this is an awfully small game. But who knows? Maybe that's what you want to build. A multiplayer, really small game that has ECS for no reason. See you later, Cam. Okay, so again, let's talk at this point environment art. And the reason why I bring up environment art here over characters at this point is thinking about screens. Like, in the environment takes up approximately 80% of the screen to 90% for some games. Even if you're talking about like a narrative game where it's like a text-driven visual novel, at least the background scene, is probably like 90% of the screen, and then the rest of it is text, and you've got the characters. So again, in the medium size here, it's worth saying, okay, let's go and create some skateboard proxies of some environment art for this puzzle. So if anybody else is really good on the tools, throw together a rough environment that will look like a horror, either indoor or outdoor, maybe some dark trees, something very, very, very simple. Again, musical theme is probably a good time to introduce that at this point while we're talking about the music big things. And we're talking about the themes of the game. So yeah. So we can go and grab some maps. Typically, I think try not to get too detailed at this point. Again, if you go and grab like a AAA game or an established game art, typically it's like really polished art. And again, I'm not a big fan of representing your game. I mean, it's really good for reference, but again, to try to the background is probably much simpler because it's simpler art. And there's a lot less detail in it. The rooms are pretty bare. So we're just talking about walls here most of the time. This is a good way to build your first project. We're not even talking about a prototype at this point. We're still just assembling the proxy, the skateboard of things together. But yeah, backrooms is a great way to start. If it happens in a room, put the walls in, right? Maybe just as proxy gray boxing. And then the most important thing of all, after going through these medium-sized things at this point, and this is before we get into characters and the rest of it, is to recheck with the big idea. All right, make sure that we've still covered off all of these points. So just very quickly go back. Are we still in scope? Have we made anything that looks like it's no longer it's forcing us, or we haven't considered how it's or where it's going to work on this particular platform? Think about the marketing as well at this point, right? Not at this point, at this point. So environment up. Think about, okay, if I'm putting that screenshot together and now I'm just going to make it a little bit more than just the bear. What's the environment like? What's this? How are these themes going to be represented? And you try to proxy that down as much as you can again. I think we've covered most of the code things. The code things are super simple. Use transforms. Don't try to use the least amount of tools. This is a good proxy for knowing getting things to go faster. See if you can use something that doesn't require a new tool. Like animation, for example, requires you to bring up, say, I don't know, rigging. You have to rig first and then you can animate. So skip all of that to start with. Just put, like if you had a proxy character, which is a sphere, put in a sphere, right? And if it needs to move, then your animation for now is literally just transforms. Or at that point, maybe like if you have a way of scaling, pinch and squash at a very basic level, pinch and squash and transform is a really basic way of animating, and that keeps you, close to the skateboard. Let's just check in again on the screens in the UI loop. Again, some of those things that that I put up there, maybe you decided, we're going to have, like 3 different upgrade trees or something, and because that just happened in your head. But I would say proxy down, start with just one of those things or a representation of one of those things. Again, to get the ball rolling faster, because if you say, okay, I need 3, we're going to need 3 of these different things, you're going to have to start thinking about the interaction between the 2 of them. And now you're not really talking mid-level anymore. Now you're talking really small. And so you're sort of muddying things up there. Any questions, by the way? Feel free just to go, hey, Andrew, just stop going on there. Please explain, because this is supposed to be a workshop. I see someone typing Tash. Is that a question, or is that just leaning on the keyboard accidentally? All right. I'll move on. No question. Yep. Sorry. My bad. Okay. So now imagine we're just doing this in our mind. We've gone from the bigger things and we've talked about the scope, and Now we're down into the medium-sized things. Now let's talk about the small details. And eventually, when we finish the small details, all at the skateboard level, right? Then we will go back and repeat the loop. We'll go back to the bigger things, and we'll try to move from 1 to 2. So I'm just giving you a teaser moving ahead, just in case you're getting lost and you're going, where's Andrew going with this? Is it just waffling on forever? We are going somewhere, I promise. Okay, so smaller details are the final step. That's when I'll bring in the characters, and we'll start to say, okay, let's think about different geometric shapes for the different characters, right? So here's my triangle guy, here's my square guy, here's my circle guy. If you're an actual artist and you can do these things fast, or you've got some placeholder art that you've already made before, yeah, by all means do that. But if you're an artist, you're probably having the other problem where you're trying to just simplify code. You want to use probably templated code as much as possible. You're trying to just skip through as much of those problems as possible. And that's why I was saying later on, learning refactoring is important, because yes, a lot of these decisions will require a lot of rework. And yes, it does end up going faster, surprisingly, because in the long run, we're breaking this down. And we'll start to be able to jump these steps. All right, so so characters, proxy those in with geometric shapes, typically. Props, gray boxing, spheres, cones, anything, level designs, puzzle, anything in the way for our puzzle horror game. Even at that point, I didn't mention there, but lighting could be something that you might even actually want to consider at a basic level. So I'm in Unreal typically, but I'll typically just go to the lighting environment tab, and I'm not an environmental lighting expert or anything, but I'll just click one of everything. So light fog, light fog, skylight, directional light, all the defaults basically, and then work from there. Because at this stage, you're still just trying to get the skateboard. It's really important to think, yes, I'm looking at smaller details, but I'm still making just a skateboard representation of all of these things. Animation, timeline, transport, transforms. Again, we've now covered that. VFX, again, if you're familiar, I'm just using Unreal Niagara as an example, but Unity or any other game engine, you'll typically have a particle system, and you'll want to grab just one of the template things for when something bad happens. Like, I don't know, let's say the game starts and then you see the enemy, and then the enemy comes to you and hits you and you die. And so you want something to happen when you die, right? So maybe even if the screen goes black, and that way you can skip the VFX. Or otherwise you want to represent a hit, throw up a single VFX, template VFX at that point. Again, with sounds, if you're not a sound designer like myself, mouth sounds really work. Very good skateboard examples. As anybody, I do recall somebody else was in Sydney was asking for mouth sounds to go and put into a game recently, and I made some mouth sounds, and that was fun. But again, that's a legitimate way of making work. So if you have a car and you want to make a zooming noise, zzz, you want to make a hit, whack. Just speak it out, record it. Though, I mean, I'm assuming you know how to record and do the basic sort of stuff. Yeah, exactly. Friday Night Fridays. Five Nights at Freddy's mouse sounds. Okay. And again, once you've gone through this process, we're going to have to go back, just recheck that we're still in sync with the medium and the big idea. If we're not, then again, move back up, rethink about it. If you have to end up shuffling things at a higher level, then what I suggest is you go back up to the high level and shuffle it, or change the thing because there's something at the lower level, if you really have to. Otherwise, maybe reconsider that maybe you should be starting a new project at this point, because you've pushed the details too far beyond the scope or the outline of what you actually originally intended to do, right? So this is one of those turning points which you inevitably have. And a lot of people run into this, and they always ask the question. And the answer is, it really depends. I don't actually have an answer for it, to be honest. And it's only something that comes with experience that you can learn to make a decision. But otherwise, I might suggest just in the absence of extra information and not being able to talk to any more team members, and you have to make a decision on the spot, roll the dice. Because if you can't make a decision already, because you don't think, because every option to you is either question mark, I don't know enough, or it's a 50-50, you think you know enough and it's 50-50, then honestly, rolling a dice at that point is a really good way of saving time, because that's all you're doing. Even if you pick one at the end of the day and you post-rationalize, you're still effectively just probably rolling a dice. Okay. Any thoughts on that, by the way? If anybody wants to shout out and go, no, you're wrong, here's why. I'm very happy to, because again, this is, I don't think any of this is gospel per se, but it's just my thoughts on how I would approach it and how I think I move forward. And the reason why I want to keep in a moving forward process and frame of mind is, one, you get to the answer faster, to get to the end, you finish the game faster. But I also think mentally, health-wise, it's a good thing. If you get stuck in a myriad of tiny details and you start to lose motivation because of that vibe coding, yeah, that can be a problem. So I'm not sure, Brad, if you're referring to vibe coding as a way to save time, but yeah, I mean, by all means, any tool that allows you to save time, if vibe coding is your thing, experiment with it, by all means, sure. I don't personally use it, but some people might. All right. Okay. So, and part of that might be because you're just trying to get that skateboard. All right. You're not trying to make it perfect, warts and all. You're trying to get to that skateboard, and you're trying to get that piece of feedback. All right. And now we are getting into the smaller details. So you can still represent in the most singular, basic form. We've got scary noises going into a horror game. We've got maybe some success clicking noises as the puzzle gets solved with the mouth again, VFX. And we'll go back to our game capsule. So I'll bring it up again. And we'll just check in with it and make sure, yep, Evil Bear still exists in the game. He's got a gun. Oh, we didn't realize he had a gun. So we might need to say, okay, where's the gun mechanic? There's some shooter aspect to the game. Yeah. All right. Let's get into the next portion. Okay. So here, this is a good discussion to have. I'll just take a quick break so I can grab some water. And I'm being aware of time. We're running out of time. So this is the end, and this will be the repeat. But effectively, this is where we iterate. And then the real kind of glue starts to happen here. We resolve our fidelity towards the ultimate vision, right? And we must remember that work expands to fill the time. And this is really, really true. And I knew this, I experienced this at least multiple times before even trying to make games. Just working in teams in general on any type of project is, in any type of work environment, work always expands to fill the time. So literally, the shorter you can set a deadline, that's literally the faster way that you can complete the game, just by doing that. And you'll speed up. You'll speed up this way by keeping things small until your iteration speed improves. I wanted to show you again. The skateboard going to a car. Okay, so we've done version 1. Again, we want to go back over, and we won't need to do this, but you can see the ideas where we go version 2, which is this version, and we start with the big, we go to the medium, and then go down to the small. And this will be our iteration, right? Effectively, you'll learn new things as you evolve this way, but a lot of those skills you'll have that enables you to move across this this timeline 1 to 5 in complexity are gained through doing that initial practice of just picking up and resolving small objects, small pieces of the games, or small pieces of concepts in art or game design itself. And slowly and surely, by moving through these pieces 1 to 2 to 3, yes, you have to refactor. Yes, you have to rework. But 2, you're also learning how to do that a little bit faster each time. And 3, you actually can get reasonably decent at it. And I started off having a bit of a a head start, I guess, because I had industry experience working and manipulating data, which is typically what you do as a programmer. If you're working on any sort of normal commercial software, typically there's data involved, and there's usually not much of a front end involved. You typically just manage data, and often you can get stuck when making games, designing these elaborate back-end systems, which are totally unnecessary because a player initially, and we're talking about for skateboard to bike. After that, yes, Forza 4 and 5, yeah, some of these coding and other much more detailed and much more tried and true tropes of what people tell you are more important. But while you're still down in these steps, 1, 2, and 3, I don't think I think they're more of a harm than a hindrance, to be honest. I think getting to the point of just proxying the topic is much more important. Okay. The other thing is that I wanted to mention was it's actually okay going through this process, and this is that you don't complete a game. I've done this multiple times where I've just got to a point where I realize during the experience, either my goals weren't being fulfilled, the project got off track, timelines, budget, you name it, lack of skills. And I just get to an area where I can't fix it because I ran into a hole that I didn't foresee. And it's okay to say, well, if you have the time, this is why part of your budget needs to be that you give yourself enough runway. But if you are making smaller projects, you have a few shots at the pie, whereas at the target. If you're doing one big, go all in attempt, you may not get another attempt after this. So start small, and you may need to start another idea. Yeah, and again, time, skill, and financial goals are situational awareness that you'll really only, I truly believe everybody only really picks this up by doing it multiple times, more than 5 or 6. In fact, to be honest, I don't think even by my 30th game, I was even still at that point not calling myself a game developer. Imposter syndrome is real. Yeah. Okay, so everybody, thank you. I don't really think we've got more time for all these discussion topics unless people want to take this offline. But I do want to say thank you, not just for listening to me, but thank you to Sam and the rest of the Playmaker team for making this all happen, because without all this, we wouldn't be here. And keep making games. Have fun. Thank you.